The following clip is a segment from the Unpopular Front podcast. You can find more episodes at unpopularfront.com. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform and enjoy the clip. As more of our workplaces become more digital, as more of our lives become atomized and segmented into different digital brands, our data is what we're paying. We are using all these new services to redefine social relations. One platform, I guess it's not really an app, platform that has really helped dramatically change lots of different niche markets is Kickstarter. Kickstarter, yes, the company that allowed us to finally have someone be able to propose and get funded a sex button that you would have in your house that you would place next to your bed. You press the button, and then if your partner also presses the button, then they both light up, and then it says, hey, you have a horny partner, instead of asking, hey, do you want to have sex? Because we're adults and we can talk about it. Yes, that Kickstarter, the Kickstarter that is home to so many failed projects, so much fraud, and a few cool things. I'm sure there's like a few video games I enjoyed that I think got funded on Kickstarter. You know, probably a lot of bad like hashtag resistance stuff. If you just listen to the podcast, Your Kickstarter Sucks, I feel like every 2 Kickstarters they do is a card game, not the good kind of card games like Magic the Gathering, but like a shitty card game like Apples to Apples. That's just, it's called Drumpf, and it's all just a bunch of different funny Trump things. Am I right, guys? That's what it seems like most of Kickstarters. But, you know, Kickstarter has become a serious player in the tech space. Ugh, I hate that, but I'm going to say it. And, you know, as these companies become bigger, I think there's a greater sense among workers, and especially those who are in these companies who maybe don't have a lot of stock options or any stock options, or who are sort of there as just more grunt labor, you know, working people who actually help keep these companies running, who answer all the customer service issues and deal with the billing and aren't just, you know, going on CNBC talking about synergistic vision. So, you know, Kickstarter is a great example of a company that was rife for unionization. I think there's a possibility that they and a few other companies who sort of came out onto the tech scene the past few years are going to go for a initial public offering. They're going to go onto the market, onto the stock market. In that context, you're going to want, if you're a laborer, to leverage your value before that happens. So why not try to start a union? So workers at Kickstarter went public with their intention to unionize under the name Kickstarter United. Makes a lot of sense. A union is just a bunch of people united for a similar cause. According to an email provided to Gizmodo, senior staffers at the crowdfunding company are already attempting to push back against their fellow employees' plan to make Kickstarter the first major tech firm to have a union. They're pushing back? First off, it's amazing that they would be one of the first major tech firms to have a union. That means Microsoft doesn't have a union, Amazon doesn't have a union, Apple doesn't have a union. And there are so many mid-sized companies who are in between there. So this is them, I think, taking advantage of the fact that it's a relatively new company and they're working on it. And I think it's great. Here's a dissenter in against Kickstarter's union saying, the effort to unionize Kickstarter hasn't felt transparent or fair. Really? What, like you're supposed to come in when you're trying to organize your workplace and like be like, okay, I want to be really fair to the bosses as possible. I have to make sure that I tell them exactly what I'm going to do so they can stop me because they have so much more power. This just shows like maybe this is really what they think and they're just so in their own heads and just like that the meritocracy works and that because they have this power, they still need to be fair. We're still all human beings, man. And they confirmed to Gizmodo that they felt Kickstarter United has been vague about grievances. So hear that. Listen to how they're going to attempt to sort of change this. It's that you need to have very specific grievances. Not that like just having a union in and of itself is probably a good idea. That idea sort of is not allowed. It's like, why would we do that unless you're like being like insanely exploited? Like unless you're chained to your desk physically and you're not fed, you're not fed food and you're like in soiled clothing, then what's your grievance? What's the big deal? And that kind of language, I feel like you hear a lot from people who are like, I'm supportive of workers' rights, but this just isn't the right time. Like that's the kind of thing you would hear like from Jonah Peretti from BuzzFeed. Screenshots forwarded by a person familiar with the matter showed that three signatories of this position were all from very high levels in the position, with senior managers, senior engineers, and senior design and tech editors. And in this email, apparently they claimed that none of them were in managerial or supervisory roles, probably because if they were, this would be considered labor busting. And you know what? It kind of sounds like their titles mean they're at least in some kind of senior position, considering that, or supervisory position, because all of them have the word senior in it. Or lead. Those are things where you have someone below you. That's just how it is. That's what those terms mean. One of the more surprising statements in the memo is the claim that tech employees like those at Kickstarter have it too good to merit organizing. This kind of goes back to that other thing, how it's like they don't have cause. They have a ping pong table. They have maybe even good health insurance. Why would they want to have a union? Why would they want to have any input on their work or their lives besides what we're giving them? It's all good. Why are you messing up the flow, man? Unions, this is the real kicker. When people talk about how, identity politics, right, and cultural appropriation, most of the time when people are complaining about that, it's on the right. I know there's a lot of people who maybe there's like a brand of leftism online that's like, yeah, fuck all of these things, And it's like, those things are very annoying to me in a lot of contexts because I think people maybe just bring it up too much interpersonally. It's like, I'm just trying to have a conversation with you. I'm not going to be shamed out of eating a taco. I like tacos. But there is a way that these sort of forms of discourse can be used cynically. I think you'd be a fool if you didn't at least acknowledge that. And Kickstarter really knocks it out of the park with this one. That's right, sports metaphors in Unpopular Front. According to this memo, unions are historically intended to protect vulnerable members of society. That's true. They're also just intended to just protect workers' rights, and workers don't have to be vulnerable members of society. Kind of the whole idea with what this is about, actually, guys, is that you want it to where they're not vulnerable members of society, but they're still together, so they can't be made vulnerable again. And we feel the demographic of this union undermines this important function. Yes. This actually kind of reminds me of a thing that I've heard about sort of the difference with how some leftists talk about, like, sort of what should we value in our organizing or whatever. And a lot of the times, there will be this conflict between, do we talk about oppression or do we talk about workers? Do we talk about sort of just who is the least empowered in comparison to those who have the most empowered, or who are those who have a good leverage point to balance out that power, where it's like workers are those who have the leverage point, but they're not inherently necessarily always going to be maybe those who are the most oppressed. And this actually is a great example of how having a sort of atrophied education on how to talk about these things, and maybe it's changing because everyone was making fun of this article, but this memo from this article, but that Kickstarter is trying to say that, having a union, unless I guess you are a sharecropper or a construction worker, or, God, probably not even a teacher that's too educated. You have to be at a certain level to justify forming a union. That's a crock of shit. You know who has a big-ass union that is incredibly justified and has been very good for the workers, and probably, if it had more power, would make the entire industry better? Professional sports teams, professional sports leagues. The NBA Players Union is a good thing. Even the NFL Union is a good thing, even though it's a really messed up organization. And this is purely obfuscation. And they even say it. We're concerned with the misappropriation of unions for use by privileged workers. Now, are there workers who have it better off? Yes. Are there workers who don't have unions who probably deserve to have a union more? Yes. I think fast food workers deserve a union probably more so than people who work at Kickstarter, but that's purely just because their position is so much lower and they need more money so they can feed their family. But there's nothing being taken away by other workers by, quote, privileged workers gaining, support for a union at a, smaller major tech firm. All that does is that just sort of normalizes and should empower more support for unions across all of society. So that's just ridiculous. But, I can see this kind of discourse happening. There's always that thing that a lot of people say online, get in line. But if Kickstarter workers were just going to just roll over and be like, fuck it, I guess I just can't do it because, I'm too privileged. All that they're doing is they're disempowering those workers who don't have those privileges. So by forming that union in your own workplace, you are helping those other workers because you can connect with them. You can give them materials for organizing. You can be like, oh my gosh, maybe part of us having this union at this major tech firm means that maybe part of what we can do is we can support other people unionizing. We don't have to have contracts where that were done with major unions as sort of the business unionism moments, sort of as labor shifted in the late 20th century. They don't have to have those agreements to where they can't show solidarity with workers in other fields, where they can't go on strike with other people. And I think this is probably going to be a mode of union busting, sort of a digital union busting that's going to happen. But in many ways, I think this just shows how pathetic these anti-union forces are. If the best that they can say is that you're culturally appropriating people from the 1930s, I think you're doing pretty good. So Kickstarter, I'm going to say this, if you guys... if you actually get that union, I will definitely be putting some money down on some Drumpf board games and some sexy Robert Mueller cartoon calendars and more weird spectrum-y anti-intimacy tools like the sex buttons on Kickstarter. So support unions in all different forms. These social arrangements are not purely just in these little bubbles. Having lots of these means you can form even larger organizations that can work together and help other people. This has been Unpopular Front. You can find more episodes at unpopularfront.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. For the left and loud, this is Unpopular Front.